Alright, man, peace. So, brothers, I've touched on this concept in the past when speaking about very prominent coaches in the sports world. As I've stated, most of these top coaches are MK handlers, meaning what? They have a very astute understanding on how to utilize the triggers that one will need to access the altars in many of these top-level Monarch athletes. Whether it's Phil Jackson or Greg Popovich, so on and so forth, you'll find that many of them oftentimes have a CIA background or a background in extreme, quote-unquote, ultra-conservative religion or Eastern religion, Eastern philosophy, things of that nature. Now, this topic is truly something that I want to expound upon with greater depth in another video. But for the sake of this video right here, featuring Mr. Phil Jackson, I'm going to touch on it lightly. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
I want to know, with all the stuff Dennis was doing, with the stuff MJ said and did, with your strong personality, how did you guys stay so cohesive when all this was going on behind the scenes?
Very easy. They have Phil Jackson. Also keep in mind that on that team they had another asset who was an MK handler in training in Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr's job was to play his role on that team and go through his apprenticeship under Phil Jackson and later Greg Popovich, so that he could fully manifest himself as a coach in the NBA, with the Golden State Warriors presiding over MK assets Steph Curry and Draymond Green. Certain people might say, well, what are you talking about with this MK handler stuff? All across the NBA, the NFL, baseball, boxing, all the major sports, globally, not just nationally, you have what are called Monarch Athletes, who are people that are programmed from childhood to be able to maximize their overall athletic abilities, sometimes through genetic modification, but for the most part, by tapping into the inner recesses of their mental capacity so that they can bring forth all of their latent abilities and take what is potential and optimize it into actuality. You have people who actually can amplify their muscle abilities, their leaping abilities, their cognitive function under stress, where certain situations will slow down for them while it remains in real time for others. These are capabilities that certain quote-unquote super athletes or Monarch athletes have. The job of a Phil Jackson, of a Greg Popovich, is to make sure that they can handle those assets and make sure that they become optimized. Because the owners view their MK athletes like stocks. They've made an investment in those athletes, oftentimes sponsoring them from their childhood all the way to when they're able to enter into the professionals. So they want to make sure that these athletes can bring everything to the table, that they can bring everything that they can do to fruition. As I've stated in previous videos, and I'll also be touching on more in depth when I get to that video, Michael Jordan was a Monarch athlete. And when Jerry Reinsdorf took over with Jerry Krause, you'll notice that the first thing that they did was change the uniform of the Chicago Bulls. Previously, they had Chicago written in script, and they changed it to the bull's head, the image of Baal, because Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause were Kabbalists. So they understood how to manipulate the Monarch athletes. Kobe Bryant is another one who I believe is a Monarch athlete, certainly a Luciferian. That's why they brought Phil Jackson over to handle him. Also, they had Shaq. I already did a video about Shaq as a Monarch or an MK athlete. So that's the point. Steve Kerr was brought onto the second 3P team. Well, he was really brought onto the team right after Jordan left to prep him for what he was going to become. Steve Kerr has a very deep history with quote-unquote espionage, as does his family, but I'll be touching on that in another video.
Well, I think it was the fact that we didn't have social media, so there was no way of letting stuff out of the locker room.
Keep one thing in mind as well. Dennis Rodman is a CIA asset. That's why they sent him over there to North Korea to talk to Kim Jong-un. It's already known by the high delegation over there in North Korea who and what Dennis Rodman is. Whenever Dennis Rodman goes to North Korea, he's accompanied by his handler.
Before we walked out of the locker room, but, you know, we had good leaders in myself and Michael and Phil Jackson that, you know, we just kept everything in-house, and whatever happened on the court, we left it on the court.
Scottie Pippen was an extraordinary athlete. See him right there, jumping head high to the rim. That dunk was over Charles Smith, and it occurred in the renowned 55-point quote-unquote double nickel game that Jordan had in Madison Square Garden.
We didn't try to embarrass anybody in any way, and whatever happened on the basketball court, whether it was a fight with MJ and Steve Kerr, like, it was shut down then. We were.
Isn't it interesting that of all the people that Michael Jordan could have gotten into a fight with, it just happened to be Steve Kerr? And the mainstream media, they love rehashing that fight, as if fights don't happen in many NBA locker rooms, on the practice floor, amongst teammates. They love highlighting that fight between Jordan and Steve Kerr, as if it's supposed to have some type of trigger aspect to it. Because for the most part, nobody even knew who Steve Kerr was until that event happened. And right after that, they won 72 games. Of course, they win the championship. They win 2 more championships. Steve Kerr goes over to San Antonio to further his tutelage, and then it goes on from there. And he becomes basically a household name. He goes into broadcasting. He becomes a GM for the Phoenix Suns, eventually the head coach of the Golden State Warriors.
We were a family, and we believed that we needed to keep everything in the circle.
I think Phil Jackson is huge to this. How many teams have what you would now call a strong coach?
Well, you can't have a strong coach right now, and that's because of 2 events. First, when Latrell Sprewell choked the shit out of PJ Carlesimo. That happened, I believe, in 1997. Then you had the event that occurred over at Indiana University, I believe either in 1999 or 2000, when the head coach at the time, the renowned Bobby Knight, who I also believe was an MK handler as well, decided that he was going to try to choke one of his players. And I believe that he was successful. That led to his demise. That also led to a heavy change in the coaching paradigm and what was tolerated from coaches. Because prior to that, coaches were allowed to basically be drill sergeants. They could talk to players however they wanted. Some of them could try to put their hands on players. All that came to an end with that event. And now, of course, ever since about 2010, the coaches have to ask players if everything is okay before they make any changes or moves, because the players have been granted so much power. But just to get back to the point of this video, when you research Phil Jackson, and I remember being a kid, being a high schooler, reading his book, Sacred Hoops. Very good book. But it gives you some background into his mindset and how he approaches coaching. He takes what they call the Zen approach, or the Zen philosophy. And Zen Buddhism is basically about illumination or enlightenment on the left-hand side. Now, his family, his mother and his father, were Pentecostal ministers under an organization called the Assemblies of God. And once again, this is definitely another video for another day. But the Assemblies of God is basically a Pentecostal belief system. The Pentecostal church system is based on the ideology that you can have the same spiritual powers today as the chosen or the elect of Christ had during the quote-unquote apostolic age, or the time of grace. And really, what the Pentecostal movement is based on something called the charismatic movement, which in and of itself is just illuminism. That's why you notice that they worship snakes. They always have to use snakes in many of their attempts to show that they have spiritual powers, because the snake or the serpent is always representative of divination, or the ability to be an oracle or a quote-unquote prophet. Because remember, the snake represents wisdom on both the right-hand side and the left-hand side. So you'll always notice with Pentecostals that they like to show that they have spiritual powers by allowing snakes to bite them. And about 20 or 30 people die every year in the Pentecostal church, allowing poisonous snakes to bite them. But once again, the Pentecostal church comes from Illuminism. It comes from the quote-unquote Enlightenment period, where they were trying to intermingle many of the ideologies of the Babylonian mystery school system with the church at the time, particularly the Anglican church. But once again, this is all another video for another day. But the modern Pentecostal movement, quote-unquote Pentecostal movement, predominantly comes from a black man by the name of William Seymour. That is where Phil Jackson gets many of his early teachings from when it comes to having the ability to tap into the quote-unquote spirit world, aka the zone, as certain players will call it. And that's why he was the coach who Dennis Rodman felt so comfortable going to. Dennis Rodman, once again, is an asset. So Phil Jackson's job is always to moderate assets, as it is for most top coaches. Many top coaches are assets themselves. And the job of a top asset is to moderate these other assets.
A strong coach.
I mean,
Am I right to call him a strong?
Totally strong. I mean, Phil is the best. I mean, he managed you on the court as well as off the court.
Now, brothers, did you hear that? Scottie Pippen stated Phil Jackson managed his assets on the court and off the court, meaning he utilized a lot of psychological manipulation.
So he was great, because all of that forced us to come together as a team, and he was the best at unifying.
And Phil Jackson is very upfront with his usage of LSD and peyote and marijuana. And LSD, once again, is one of the core drugs of the MK Ultra mind control program.
Unifying guys.
And not afraid at having you guys all unify against him. He knew that he could handle that, and he knew that he could still coach you guys through that, and that was a way of bringing
And by the way, real quickly.
Of course, because he wanted them to have their Zen moment of enlightenment, where they could focus on him, and then out there on the floor, use the quote-unquote triangle offense, which, as we know, represents the pyramid, which was introduced to Phil Jackson by Tex Winter, who was another handler.
How many of these teams now have a team that would stay together like that and play 82 all the time? And the bar is their own play. They weren't playing against the league. They were playing against themselves. And
Right, all that's cool, but you know what? You were better off bringing up Phil Jackson, because that was a different era. We have to give teams credit for being able to dominate their era. The Bulls were the best team of the 90s. Leave it at that. Just to get back to the point, these top coaches, baseball, football, basketball, the prominent coaches, MK handlers. Sparky Anderson, Tommy Lasorda, from back in the day, Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich. These guys are handlers, man. In football, Bill Belichick. This new kid out there with the Rams, McVay. McVay is most likely an asset and a handler. But anyway, peace. Okay, so now, brothers, in this epilogue, I just want to expound on certain statements that I made pertaining to Mr. Phil Jackson, the highly decorated former professional basketball coach of the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers. One of the notions that I always touch on repetitively on this channel is the concept of MK Ultra head coaches. Most of your top shelf head coaches are MK handlers. What does that mean? That means that they understand that certain high profile athletes are under the programming, meaning what? That they've been privy to psychological manipulation, as well as, in some cases, even manipulation of their genome to make sure that many of their physical capabilities can be accentuated. The job of the coach is to be able to bring out the best in that asset. The owners and the GMs, they're also very aware of the MK Ultra program and the Monarch sports athletes. The job of a head coach, once again, a MK handler head coach, is to make sure that the owner sees some type of optimization of that asset so that he gets return on his investment. That's where Phil Jackson comes in. That's where a Greg Popovich comes in. That's where Bill Belichick comes in. They know how to access certain aspects of that Monarch athlete to bring out the best in them. That's why the Bulls had to get rid of Doug Collins after 3 years and 3 straight playoff appearances. He was a good coach, but he wasn't a great coach. Great coaches know how to access the inner aspects of their Monarch athletes. As soon as Jerry Reinsdorf and Jerry Krause came on board, that's when you saw many changes on the Bulls. They changed their emblem. At one time, I think the word Chicago was written in script on the front of their jerseys. After Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf came on board, they changed the emblem of the team to a bull's head for Baal. They also changed the introductory theme music to the Alan Parsons Project song, The Eye in the Sky. Why is that? Because they knew that Michael Jordan was imbued with that Orion programming. He was proverbial Heru, the god of the air. Phil Knight, associated with Nike, as well as Dean Smith with North Carolina, they knew about Michael Jordan's programming already. I'm sure that certain brothers will be thinking that what I'm saying is far-fetched. It's not. Once again, most people have very little to no idea what the sports world is actually about. Also notice that when they brought in Phil Jackson to coach the Chicago Bulls, not only was he able to maximize the winning potential of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, but then immediately he was reallocated over to the LA Lakers. Why is that? It was because the LA Lakers had a couple of Monarch athletes themselves, that being Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. And we're going to see that in a moment. I already did a couple of videos on Shaquille O'Neal being a Monarch athlete. But now let's look at this photo right here. Phil Jackson is sitting right in between Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Now, in reference to Scottie Pippen, I'm not quite sure if he was Monarch programmed, but Michael Jordan definitely was, no doubt about it. And Phil Jackson is making the hand sign of the dragon's eye right in between them, also known as the spirit of Longinus, to show that he is a venerator of the mother goddess. Once again, I'm sure that many brothers out there are saying to themselves, this nigga crazy. He's taking it too far. It's okay, let's see. Let's go to the next one. Here's Phil Jackson with that very renowned pose that many cats are familiar with if you've done even rudimentary research on the subject, with the index finger to his temple, showing that he has the intellectual capacity to maintain the secrets and rise up the levels. The background color also, as we all notice and see, is the color orange to show that he's been illuminated. Phil is an MK handler, as well as probably a low-level programmer. Now, his official backstory is that he came from Montana and that his parents were members of the Pentecostal church organization known as the Assembly of God. For many of you brothers who might not know, and I've stated this in the video already, the Pentecostal church system is a branch of the mind control program, not only of America, but of the entire globe. Many of your top-level preachers and pastors are handlers, if not outright programmers. The Pentecostal church system is known as the charismatic movement. That's truly a video for another day because I have to go in depth into that concept. But in the Pentecostal church, you'll notice that one of the exploits that their congregation does is hold up serpents. That's something that goes back to the ancient world. You would always hold up a serpent to show your allegiance to the quote-unquote serpent god, that being Zeus or Apollo. The priestesses of Apollo would always wrap themselves with the serpent because the serpent represented divination, or the bridge between the physical world and the spirit world, i.e. the rainbow bridge. It was a symbol of illumination. The serpent is also the symbol of the sun. Why is that? Because the sun, once again, is a symbol of illumination. So Phil Jackson is trying to show us that he's in the know. He's of a higher level. That is why Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf brought him on, because they knew that he was a Kabbalist. He was a high-level Kabbalist, and he would be able to bring out the best in Jordan. So now, brothers, just to provide some context to the statement that I made pertaining to Mr. Phil Jackson and the hand sign that he was doing where he had his right index finger up against his temple. This is Mr. Vernon Jordan. Many of you brothers who go back to the 90s, you'll remember him as being one of the very good friends of Mr. Bill Clinton. For those of you who don't know, Vernon Jordan was a very notable figure in the black Luciferian circle, really the black political circle of the 1970s and 1980s. At one time, he was the head of the United Negro College Fund. And as we can see here, he's letting those in the know understand that he's in the know and that he has the mental capacity to exceed to the higher levels of the craft. Now, this is a former congressman from the 1950s by the name of Louis Stokes. He also is doing the same hand sign. This hand sign is used not only in the Masonic, aka Luciferian sphere, but also the Kabbalistic sphere. Why is that? Because the Kabbalah and Masonry are just two branches on the same tree, or really just two twigs on the same branch. That's all they are. Once again, we have Mr. Leonard Nimoy, a Kabbalah wizard. Let's read this blurb here that's in association with the inset photograph. It says, look close at this item from Time Magazine, April 4th of 2005, and you'll see actor Leonard Nimoy, Star Trek icon who thrills sci-fi fans as a Vulcan who regularly gave the Kabbalistic shin sign with his hand. Please understand, brothers, the quote-unquote god Vulcan is the god of fire. That's where we get the term for a volcano from the quote-unquote god Vulcan, which really just means a priest of Baal. The name Vulcan means a priest of Baal, okay? Vulcan or Bolkaan or Baal Khan. And in other languages, it got corrupted to Vulcan. It's a god of fire, same as Molech or Baal, etc. Here, Nimoy is presenting the Mark Master's Dugard sign. Interestingly, the text of the article from Time reveals that Nimoy, whose hobby is photography, is exhibiting his photographs of very large women at a New York City art gallery. The photography of obese women are also found in Nimoy's book entitled Shekinah. The word Shekinah in Hebrew is feminine for Holy Spirit. So in other words, what the author of this article is letting us know is that Leonard Nimoy is a woman worshiper. Once again, brothers, within the realm of Luciferianism, they believe that quote-unquote God has three parts: the masculine principle, the feminine principle, and their son. Okay, so the masculine principle is the horned god. The feminine principle is the so-called mother goddess, and their son, who's named Cupid or Heru or what have you, Harpocrates, etc. So Leonard Nimoy is a high-level Kabbalist. So the quote-unquote God of Kabbalah is Asar. The god that they want the masses to venerate, though, is the feminine principle, the mother goddess. That's the quote-unquote God for the masses. The God for those behind the curtain is the horned god. But for the masses, once again, they want you to worship the woman or the feminine principle, as well as the son, the little son that that was born of the mother goddess making love to the sun itself. So the mother goddess is known as Aurora. She's also known as the quote-unquote Holy Spirit, aka Juno, or the dove goddess. Now, brothers, pay very close attention to this photograph right here of the rapper Fabulous. As we can see, he's also doing that hand sign with his left index finger against his temple to let you know not only is he in the know and he has a high level of understanding of the Luciferian principles, but he's also letting you know that he's taking the left-hand path. Now, let's also pay very close attention to his necklaces, because they're going to convey to us, the reader or the viewer, at least those of us who are in the know, what his allegiances are. Not only his hand sign, but also his jewelry. Let's do a close-up. As we can see here, he has on the quote-unquote Jesus piece, which, as I've told you, brothers, before, that's part of the uniform of the recording industry. Why is that? Because that's not for the Christ of the scriptures. That's for Tammuz or Adonis or what have you, Heru. That is the Christ of this world, that being the Luciferian world, and particularly the craft, that being the entertainment industry, and those who decide that they're going to indulge or immerse themselves in the left-hand path or the Luciferian ideologies, etc. But he's also wearing two necklaces of the quote-unquote fallen angel. Okay? And those are becoming more and more popular. The little angel necklaces that a lot of these cats are wearing now. So Fabulous is letting you know what he's about. And of course, Michael Jordan. He's also helping us understand that he is in the know. He's embraced the left-hand path. And we see he's wearing the all-black for Saturn, which makes sense because he's wearing all of his rings. He's trying to show you that he's the Lord of the Rings. Who's the Lord of the Rings? That's Saturn. So Michael Jordan was an extremely high-level MK Monarch athlete. And Phil Jackson's job was to make sure that he got every drop of what he could out of Michael Jordan, because Doug Collins and the previous coaches could not get the job done, most likely because they were not trained in the Kabbalah like Phil Jackson was. Now here's another photo of Phil Jackson. As we can see, he's making another Kabbalistic pose. And it's not happenstance that he wears this t-shirt for the quote-unquote Grateful Dead. Remember, Phil Jackson always talks about how he's a huge fan of the Grateful Dead. Their lead singer, I believe, is a man named Jerry Garcia. Jerry Garcia came through the mind control program, the LSD mind control program of the 1960s. Now, for those of you brothers out there who might not be familiar with the group The Grateful Dead, they were part of the quote-unquote counterculture movement of the 1960s. Counterculture is just code word for CIA-sponsored mind control program and societal altering culture of the 1960s. Most of those groups, like the Mamas and the Papas and the Grateful Dead, Jimi Hendrix, the Doors, etc., they were all MK Ultra groups. They all came out of the military-industrial complex. They were prepped and trained, and they were placed under mind control by being subjected to LSD. So when Phil Jackson states that he grew up a big fan of the Grateful Dead, that's kind of hard to believe, first off, because he was in college around that mid-60s area, and I'm not saying that maybe he was not a big fan of their music. Maybe he was. But he was pretty much fresh out of the Pentecostal church. So how much Grateful Dead did he actually listen to? Or maybe he got turned out to it in college. Maybe that was also the time period where he was placed under a certain level of instruction, where he was informed on what his overall role was going to be in the NBA. Because from the moment that he touched down with the New York Knicks in 1968 or 69, he was known as the person who was a role player, but who was always involved in other things. And one of his main Svengalis was Red Holzman, who also was a Kabbalist and the head coach of the New York Knicks at that time. Phil Jackson was just as much of a chronicler of those great New York Knicks teams of the late 1960s and early 1970s as he was a player, almost as if he was being prepared for a greater role in the sports world after his career was over. But just to get back to this shirt, yes, Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, they were an MK Ultra group. And as we can see, it says Grateful Dead on it. And the emblem is of a clown god of death. Now, who was the clown god or the god of mischief? He's also known as Loki or Hermes. And that's talking about Kush. Now, please keep in mind that Hermes is also the god of information. He's the god of communication. He's the messenger god. So basically, his job, Hermes, was to act as an intermediary between the quote-unquote major gods and other aspects. He was the intermediary of the underworld as well. So Phil Jackson is letting you know that as a head coach and as an MK handler, he's a god of mediation. He's a god of communication. And that's what he was for the most part. There's nothing here that's happenstance in this photo. Everything is done on purpose. But let's prove my point even further. Here's a magazine cover for ESPN in the mid to late 2000s. I think that this is 2005. And as we can see, there are some allusions to Kobe Bryant and Phil Jackson being one entity. And it harkens back to the concept of the quote-unquote Roman god Janus. Janus is just another aspect of Hermes. Remember, Janus is the god of doorways. He's the entity that assists man in being able to travel from the physical world to the spirit world. I mean, if this photo does not convey that Phil Jackson was the MK handler for Kobe Bryant, I don't know what does. We see that their heads are melding together. They're bringing together opposites. Old Caucasian man, young so-called black man. These are what are known as hermetic principles. And that's actually what the film Get Out was about. The bringing together of opposites. And that's based in, well, that's pretty much a foundation of what the veneration of the Baphomet is all about. But once again, just looking at this photo right here, we can see that Phil Jackson and Kobe Bryant are one entity. Phil Jackson is operating Kobe Bryant by remote control. And of course, the font of ESPN is in the orange. So once again, show what? That they've both been illuminated. But let's go even further. This is another alternate photo. Brothers, it's clear to me. They even have that same eye. You see how they did this photo? They have the two heads going opposite like Janus, but there are three eyes. So the middle eye, which is where Kobe and Phil Jackson meet, is the third eye. You understand that? So this is how you know when I tell you brothers, these things, I know that y'all cats think that I'm going too far. I'm not going too far. I'm just trying to help you understand what this world, quote unquote world that we live in, is actually about. Because sports is just entertainment, but it's also a mechanism for me to be able to communicate more intricate things, particularly for you so-called black men out there, so that you understand to not idolize these people, because for the most part, they're just props and pawns. But pay very close attention. Look at this cover. We see here that this creature, which is really a cyclops, and what the cyclops were was servants of Baal. We see the third eye there, and the other two eyes, they're looking opposite ways. This is the Janus, okay, the god of doorways. One eye looking to the past, the other looking to the future. That one eye in the middle, which has been illuminated. And once again, the font of ESPN magazine is in orange. It's in orange to show you that they are what? They are sun worshippers. And we've already seen that in very intricate detail of great depth in the videos that I've done on Kobe Bryant being a worshiper of Lucifer. And there's more to come on that. But anyway, peace.